are inflexible and are not creative enough to permit their employees and their students to experiment and explore new ideas. I'm very encouraged in my home country to see considerable emphasis being placed on getting the right people into positions of power and influence in educational institutions so they can regain their once eminent place as sources of growth and development. Incidentally, this reminds me of one of the ironies of the modern world. The skills of cataloguing, filing and retrieving information effectively are virtually mandatory for anyone who wants to be a success in their business life. Ironically, these skills were historically only taught to young women, who then applied them as secretaries and personal assistants. Now that we've replaced most of our secretaries with computers, these skills are even more important, but too many men still think they're beneath them and don't learn them. This might be a small reason why so many women are doing so well in their own entrepreneurial businesses and why so many men are failing. If educational institutions should be doing more to help people learn thinking and analytical skills, all organisations should be doing more to give their employees the opportunity to use these skills. Too many organisations are still organised in strictly hierarchical ways, which restrict the way information gets inside the organisation and which try to control how it flows through. In this global world, you can never be sure where vital information will come from. Where once a small group controlled the flow of information through their elite clubs and private networks, now innovation and opportunity literally spring up from anywhere. Successful organisations in the future will be open to experimentation and learning. They will encourage the free flow of information, particularly inside the enterprise. And they will be well connected to, if not embedded in, their environment. Only then will they be able to successfully reinvent themselves as circumstances change. Now, not everyone will agree with what I've just said. Some will point out that freeing up information flow reduces security and increases the risk of subversion and sabotage. They will argue for prudent control over information in order to reduce the risk that it will fall into the wrong hands. Some will argue for the same controls on civil liberty grounds or to protect commercially sensitive material. These are real issues. As the United States found out on September 11, 2001, it was their own internal systems of pilot training which trained the hijackers. Similarly, many banks have found that the increasingly distributed nature of their information systems has led to increased employee fraud and embezzlement. These are not new concerns. This is a copy of an article from the January 1997 edition of Global Workforce, entitled Global Business Under Siege, which focuses on just such threats. Different people will respond to these threats in different ways. I'm personally not surprised by current levels of sabotage and terrorism. These have always been a reaction to feelings of oppression or of being dispossessed. For me, they're not an argument for tightening up on information flow. Rather, they highlight an urgent need for greater compassion in dealing with those who feel threatened or displaced by increasing globalisation. I see this as directly related to the other trends I mentioned earlier in this broadcast. The demise of full-time jobs and the commercialisation of social services threaten many people. And it should be no surprise if people who feel threatened protest and rebel. These threats need to be confronted and resolved directly. They are real, and they can't be covered up for long. They require governments and societies to provide short-term safety nets for those who are displaced, to reduce bureaucratic workplace legislation and regulation, and to dissolve service delivery to the community level so people can help each other rather than becoming dependent on a state bureaucracy. Slowly, this is being recognised, as is indicated by the 2001 report of the Panama Ministry of Labour and Human Development, which noted, and I quote, "The government's top priorities of poverty reduction and sustainable human development are simply not achievable without a substantial modernisation of how the workforce is trained and how freely workers can move and advance within the economy." But it's not only at the government level that these changes need to be dealt with. We all have an obligation to our own survival and to that of our children, and to confront the global challenge of change. First, we need to be prepared to tell the truth about the way things are. We do live in challenging and changing times, and some of us are coping better than others. This must be acknowledged, not just as some sort of inevitable and unavoidable consequence of a globalised world, but as a human and environmental tragedy. We cannot continue dispossessing people and damaging our planet, or our entire future is at risk. Telling the truth is an important first step in reconfiguring ourselves for a better future. And just as important is our sense of identity. Having a resilient sense of who you are, whether you are a person, a company or a country, is an important precursor to successfully responding to changing circumstances. How one acquires, maintains and modifies this sense of identity is a critical part of any reconversion process. The more global things become, the harder it is to maintain a sense of our own identity. At a national level, cultural history, language, and even native populations are all disappearing. And as a result, there is a disturbing trend towards cultural homogeneity, which, as I hope I demonstrated earlier in this broadcast, makes us much more vulnerable if things change quickly and unpredictably. At a corporate level, companies are becoming larger and more global, which inevitably means more homogenous. Even smaller local companies are increasingly feeling that they can't survive unless they compete head-on in the same way their larger competitors do. And perhaps more profoundly of all, at an individual level, we all have an unprecedented opportunity to create and maintain a life which works for us as individuals, not as cogs in an industrial machine. Notwithstanding everything I've already said, I do believe there is altogether too much hype around the notion of reconversion. There is no doubt that being successful in the future requires more people to take more control over their lives than ever before. But this emphatically does not mean that we need to contemplate changing who we are every year, let alone every week. All that is required of us is that we stay alert to our environment, so that we become aware of impending changes earlier rather than later. In fact, this is perfectly natural behaviour, something our ancestors did for thousands of years. And it's really nothing more than ought to be required of the species which is in effective control of this planet. Our challenge for ourselves, inside our educational institutions, businesses or government entities, and in our societies and countries in general, is to learn how to engage the whole of who we are for all of our lives. And that is well within our capability.
We will now continue with the second question and answer period. Our first question is from the Technological Institute of Tepic. Please go ahead, please.
Yes, our question is, what's the impact in education institutions of university level with the reconversion of the workforce and the global market?
Impact on higher education.
Yes, higher education face a particular challenge because originally universities were set up without any expectation of vocational outcomes. They were originally set up to be nothing more than institutions of learning and knowledge creation. And if people then took that and applied it to a job, that was terrific. Then in recent years, we've said to universities, no, you need to be much more concerned with employment outcomes and with preparing people for the next phase of their life. And that was enough of a struggle for them. And now we've said to them, not only do you have to do that, but you have to prepare them for perhaps 5 or 6 career changes during their lives. And I think universities are still struggling with all levels of those changes. And those in charge of universities have my greatest respect as they try and manage what is really a very difficult process. But the fact is that universities are no more immune from this continually changing world than any other institution. And in fact, as I've tried to say in my presentation, I think they have an increased responsibility simply because they are at the cutting edge of new learning and thinking, and they ought to be leading the way. But it is difficult for them.
Fabulous. We go to Baja California in La Paz. Please go ahead.
Yes, my question is how to respond through an integral university system, and what are the topics for universities in your opinion?
The curriculum and new topics.
I tried to answer that to some extent in what I've just said. I think another challenge for universities, to continue the answer to the previous question, is that it's no longer a matter of teaching stuff. The content now is much more available, much more accessible, much less in the heads of the academics in institutions are much more available. So the real challenge for the institution is to prepare people to be better learners, to understand themselves and their environment and to think about that and deal with it in an intelligent way, and to use whatever particular content that they're involved with in that way. So that is another challenge for educational institutions, is to move away from the idea that they're the ones that have the knowledge and they're passing that on to the next generation, and to see themselves as facilitating the development of people, both the educational and the vocational, but also the personal development of people. And in that there is an increased curriculum. You can now learn how to learn, and there is now a curriculum available to teach people how to learn, and I think there's a real role for universities in that level.
It's a major change. We go to Ecuador, MR and Company Consultants. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. From MR Consulting, we ask you this question. Would it be possible that knowledge that gives competitive advantage to companies would become crossed information?
I didn't understand the question. I'm sorry. Would become... Could you say some more about what you mean by...
I think we have lost the connection there. Okay, I'm sorry that we have lost the connection there. We go to Chihuahua, Mexico for the next question, which we try to get that question again.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please. Mexico.
Good morning from Chihuahua, Mexico. Can we think that these drastic changes that we're living with globalization are against humanity, because these should be guided by clear rules?
Okay, the human side of the global change.
Yeah. I turned 50 last year, and like many people, celebrated in a big way. 50 is still a big milestone, and my friends brought together people from my different ages up until 50. And I was reflecting, as I was thinking about that, just how much faster things have moved, how much more I'm expected to jam in to my life between 40 and 50 than I was expected to jam in, say, between 20 and 30. And I can't help but thinking that we have reached a point at which the pace is just too fast. It is too difficult for people to absorb all that is required of them. And one of the challenges for us as a species, I think, is to get our pace of change back to a level at which we can reflect on the consequences of our change. We all see examples of a decision made with the best of intentions, and then the next day we find what a lousy decision it was, and we have to undo it all. We build the freeway in the wrong place or something like that.
We go to Sinaloa, Mexico for the next question. Go ahead, please.
Sí, buenos días.
Good morning.
Desde la Universidad Autónoma de Sinaloa, Culiacán, Sinaloa, México.
From Sinaloa, Mexico, we have this question.
En el proceso de reconversión,
in the reconversion process of the workforce and the role of the global marketplace, which are the characteristics of the relationships between state and multinational sectors and the Internet?
The state has a really profound role here, and it does deal with the same issue as was being dealt with the previous question. The state has the opportunity to set the pace at which things happen. Organisations are in a marketplace, they have to operate quickly, that people at a state level do have the opportunity to reflect and think more intelligently about where they're going. That's the challenge.
And thank you for your excellent questions, but we have run out of time. We hope that you have enjoyed participating once again in this exciting multilingual and multinational program. We invite you to participate in the second video conference of this year's series, Strategies for Competitive Performance, airing February 27, 2003, entitled Maximizing Value Through a Synchronized Organization, Optimal Resource Management. For additional information on this video conference series, please consult your participants manual, where you will find the dates and specific topics for each program. We would also like to invite our site coordinators and our viewers to learn more about ITC's competency-based training programs and its catalog of past programs. For more information, you may visit our website, itc-group.org. On behalf of all of us, I thank you for your ongoing participation and interest in this program. Thank you, and see you soon.